Good morning, dear friends. Today is Sunday, the 2nd of Tavis, the 26th of December. Yeah, I'm wearing my talis still. You see, I'm still in shul. But I'm going to get in some learning. We are currently studying the entire Talmud, one page, one line at a time. At the moment, Masechet Shabbos, chapter 10. We are straddling page 94b and 95a. A considerable pivot, a change of pace. Until now, we've been talking about carrying stuff that's being carried, how to carry it, kelachar yad, etc., etc. And then, of course, on Friday, we introduced a new Mishnah, a Mishnah that discusses other malachas. The malachas of removing, cutting, removing, biting hair, nails, and other stuff having to do with the human body that's not explicitly a melacha, but I'm sorry, it's not a biblical, it's not an av melacha, it's not an explicit act that was present in the Mishkan. And the machlokes is, how far removed are these acts from the activities in the Mishkan? Are they removed enough to cause them to only be a rabbinic restriction, or are they problematic enough that they are considered a tolda, an offshoot of a malacha? And if it's a tolda, it is a malacha. It is a biblical prohibition. Now, because we're short for time, I just want to mention that we're dedicating our learning l'schus, the complete and speedy healing and well-being of the names that we put on our chat, and the well-being and good circumstances for all the dear members of our chabura, hoping for health and happiness and everything good in between. Let's share the screen. And on Friday, we talked about cutting nails, cutting hair. We spoke about cutting hair and nails by your hand, by a tool. If you use a vessel, if you use a kli, it's certainly a malacha. If you use one's hand for yourself, there's a machlokes. If you use the hand for somebody else, that was an interesting topic that was discussed on Friday. Today, we're going to jump into the next discussion. It'll be a little micro unit, and that's going to be about nails and perhaps what we'll call cuticles. Let us see. Tanya, because again, we talked about cutting nails, but what about the skin? I think it's called the cuticle. Correct me if I'm wrong. I muted everyone, so I can't hear you, but if you're Tanya.
Is the cuticle like a hangnail? Like a little tiny little nail?
I think it's the stuff. I think it's the stuff around your nail.
Oh, I thought it was actually like when you hangnails. Maybe
see,
not.
Cuticles. The cuticle is a layer of clear skin located along the bottom edge of the finger or toe. This area is also known as a nail bed. Okay. Thank you, Google. Tanya Rabbi Shimon Elazar. Rabbi Shimon Elazar taught. What happens? You can't cut your nails on Shabbos. But what if you have a broken nail? What if a nail is mostly hanging and dangling? And by the way, sometimes a broken nail, the hanging nail could be painful, or even if it's not painful, there is a strong human desire, or at least some people, to want to pull off and remove that nail. And by the way, Dr. Hammer, we missed you on Friday, but we referenced a topic. Maybe tomorrow we'll be able to visit it again. But we referenced a topic that we suspected you would have professional insight on the broader topic of biting, cutting, removing nails and hair and the like. But maybe tomorrow we'll have a chance to explore it. We have a little more time. So what if you have a nail hanging, a dangling nail? Shaperish ruba, that it is mostly severed. Or vitzitzin, shreds of skin, which I envision to be a cuticle or something in that associated region. Shaperish ruban, but maybe not. Maybe it's any kind of piece of skin. But for reasons that we'll see later, yeah, you see Rashi. Kimin ritzuis dakos, like a little string of flesh. Haparshois me'or ha'etzba, that comes off partially or separated from the skin around the finger. Saviv hatziparin, around the nail. So tzitzin is a piece of skin around the nail that's mostly removed. Can you remove it on Shabbos? So Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says, biyad, if you're going to use your hand, mutar, it is permitted. Bikli chayiv chatas, but if you use a scissors, a nail clipper, or something to that effect, not only is it prohibited, but it would warrant a chatas, which means that it is a very severe degree of prohibition. Let's see Rashi's interesting explanation. Shapir Shan Ruban. What does it mean that it is mostly removed? Kroivin notek. It's very easy or close to be removed. Doesn't take a lot of effort. So we quoted a Bryce, and the Gemara is shocked at what it hears. Can we find an instance where to do the activity with a tool, it would be an absolute outright biblical prohibition? And to do it biyad is not only not a biblical prohibition, but absolutely mutter, absolutely permitted. Rashi, kivon de bekli chayev chatos. If doing a tool, using a kli, you get a chatos, ikoshvus, biyad ikoshvus, there would still have to be a rabbinic prohibition. Shvus means a rabbinic prohibition, gzeira atu kli, lest a person becomes so accustomed to cutting their nails or biting their nails or removing their nails in a manner that was not biblical, that you'd come to do it even in a biblical manner. So the Gemara says, Hachi Kamar, let's add a little bit more context. And yes, there is a way that we might make the case that doing it with your hand would be permissible entirely. And so now we're just going to add a few more details. And admittedly, actually, Dr. Stamler is not on today, but this is probably a good place where he would ask us for a chart. And indeed, it warrants a chart. But let's see if we can read it. Pirshu Ruban, if the piece of skin, the piece of nail, is mostly detached, biyad mutter, to use your hand to pluck it off. Don't get your halachic advice from a mid-sentence. But biyad mutter, you're allowed to use your hand to yank off this nail or piece of skin. Quickly, if you're going to use a tool, scissors or a nail clipper, potter, aval asr. One is not biblically liable, but you shouldn't do it rabbinically. Loi pirshu ruban, if the skin is not or the nail not mostly removed. Now, biyad, using your hand, potter aval asr. It's not a biblical prohibition, but you shouldn't do it. So basically, if it's mostly off, according to Rabbi Shimon Elazar, you can remove it with your hand. Rabbinically, you cannot use a scissors. If it's not mostly off with your hand, you shouldn't do it, but it's not biblical. And if you use a nail clippers, it's just like any other scenario of cutting your nails, that it is entirely prohibited. So 4 scenarios. It's mostly dangling off, you use your hand. It's mostly dangling off, you use a tool. It's mostly attached and you use your hand, or it's mostly attached and you use a tool. So now we have the 2 extremes. If it's mostly dangling off and you use your hand, according to Rabbi Shimon Elazar, you can remove it. But if it's mostly attached and you use a tool, then it's biblical. And now we found a way to explain the teaching of Rabbi Shimon Elazar to not be utterly shocking, to make more sense, but it warranted adding in some additional information. So can you actually do this? Can a person remove a cuticle that's mostly off? Amar Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda comments halachically on this topic. Halacha, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. Halachically, we may follow the stance of Rabbi Shimon Elazar. So now let me ask you a question. Does that mean you can remove a mostly detached nail according to this Gemara? So it's still complicated because there's an added qualifier. Amar Rabba Bar Bar Chana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. We must further add to the conversation the teaching of Rabbi Yochanan. V'hu, when do we say that one is permitted to remove a dangling item with your hand if it's mostly detached? Okay, I need some help over here. It was removed facing upwards, and there is pain involved. So the pain part we can all understand. Sometimes a loose nail drags against things, it causes a lot of pain. You can imagine that. Sometimes the most painful things are the small wounds. But what's Pershu Klape Maila? So now I'm going to read Rabbi Steinsaltz's translation first, and then we'll see some more. That is if the partially severed portion of the nail were severed facing upwards near the nail. So let's imagine the nail. There is a more instinctive direction where the nail would break, which is probably, well, just imagine how a nail typically might maybe come loose. And then there's the way that it's severed facing upwards, which again,
It's like it actually got flipped over completely because normally the nail faces down. I guess it's facing up. It got
so
actually.
usually the way we imagine, let's say a person has a long nail and it gets snagged. So it follows almost like a natural, or maybe it comes downward. But if it breaks upwards, we can imagine that would be more painful.
Oh yeah.
But I wanted to, so let's read Rabbi Steinsaltz again. This is one of the, by the way, this little line over here causes a lot of problems, which is why I wanted to pause here for a moment. So Rabbi Steinsaltz says the partially severed portion were severed facing upwards, causing pain. Rashi, Litzad hatzipoiren hischilu lifroish. It started, and I think Rashi is actually understanding that we're not necessarily talking about a nail. We could be talking about the skin. It started coming off litzad hatzipoiren, near the nail. I still don't know what that means, by the way. Let's do one more thing. Let's go to Tosfos. V'hu sheper sheklapi maila. I'm sorry if you're getting frustrated. I'm not clarifying. This is a fundamentally unclear state and comment. So if you're feeling uncertain, it means that you're picking up the authentic vibe of this sugya. Tosfos, Pirish by Kuntris. Tosfos says, let's quote Rashi. Rashi is referred to as Kuntris because his original format was as a small pamphlet that was outside of the Talmud. Keneged Roshei Etzba Oisav Shehem L'mayla Kishemagbiya Yada. You pick up your hand, and the torn nail or the torn skin is to the top of your finger, to the top of the nail. Rabbeinu Tam Ifarish. Rabbeinu Tam says, no, we're actually not talking about the part of the skin or the nail that's on top of the nail. Sheklape guf kare klape maila. Hold your hand out, look at your fingers, the part that's towards the bottom, the part that's actually closer to your body. That is what is called klape maila, the part that's on top. And then the Gemara quotes Miseches Nida about another part of the body where ula maila actually means the part that's lower. So there's a precedent for an ambiguity at the very least. When you say towards the top, well, everything is about the direction. Is the top the end of the finger or the top that's closer to the person's person? And that is the question. Folks, I do need to go in literally 1 minute. And again, I want to apologize for keeping the session so short, but I could not envision a scenario where we canceled learning entirely. But before we do that, let's take a look at the Shulchan Aruch. Be ready to be disappointed. Tzipoiren shapirsha, the nail that became removed. Vitzitzin, or the skin, shem kemein ritzuos dakos, the part of the cuticle that comes loose. Shapirsha mi'ora etzba, that detached from the skin that is around the finger. Savavat tzipoiren, around the nail. In pirsha ruban klapi maila, if it became mostly detached. Umitzarai soy lihasiran mi biyad. I'm sorry, lasiran. If the break is towards the top and it's causing him pain, lasiran miyad mutter, he can use his hand to remove. Like our Gemara said, bikli potter of asar, but to use a nail clipper or scissors is rabbinically prohibited. Loy pirshu ruban, but what if most of it didn't come off? It wasn't mostly detached. Biat potravel asur, you're rabbinically prohibited from removing it by hand. Bikli, and to use a scissors, a nail clipper, chayiv chatas. This is absolutely problematic. If you'll notice, the Shulchan Aruch, Rabbi Yosef Karo, quotes the words of the Gemara, klapi maila, but he didn't give a definition. Pirish Rashi, klapi maila, klapi roishatz paisav. Rashi says that the upper part is what's closer to the fingertips. Rabbeinu Tam Pirish Hano klapi aguf. Rabbeinu Tam says it's the bottom of the finger. B'tzarech lachosh l'shnei hapirushim. And we must be concerned and mindful of both Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam. In a frustrating way, what the Shulchan Aruch essentially is paskening is neither option, neither scenario is available because Rashi and Tosfos have an outright, utter debate about the definition of the part of the finger that you can remove the nail. You must be mindful of both Rashi and Tosfos. It's not very often, by the way, that the Shulchan Aruch himself quotes Rashi and Tosfos. I mean, it's not in unheard of, but it's not super common. And so we're left with a situation where you really never should be removing any nail or skin. And that's, of course, as I said, be prepared to be a little disappointed. Hang on one more second. Let's look fast in the Rambam. Ziparin, Shapir Sharuba, a person whose nail came off mostly, Vitzitzin Shalosh Shapir Sharuban, or the skin, in Pirsha Klapi Milo Matsar Saisai. If it comes from the top and it causes pain, Mutal, Litel, Oisan, Biyad, Avoloy Bikli. You can use a hand but not a tool. But if there's no pain involved, Aser. So Rambam says the same thing. He gives all of the details as the Gemara gives, but the Rambam doesn't teach. He doesn't translate what it means. Pirshu Klapi Maila. So what do you think the Rambam means when he says Pirshu Klapi Maila? Which one does he mean? I don't know which one he means, but what I can tell you is that to the Rambam, the interpretation is so utterly clear that it needn't be clarified. So I think we're going to leave it at that, my dear friends. So let me give a fast recap. Again, admittedly it's very early, but we're going to draw today's session to a close. The short question topic of discussion is if a nail is partially removed or the skin is hanging, can you remove it? And there are two scenarios. Either it's mostly off or it's not mostly off. Then there's two methods of removal: with your hand, with a kli. And those four scenarios give us a broad spectrum. If it's mostly off and it's biyad, mutter. If it's going to be removed with a kli, or it's mostly on and you move your hand, rabbinically prohibited. If it's mostly attached and you're going to use a kli, it is entirely prohibited. So it sounds like we have an easy heter to remove a mostly dangling piece of skin or nail. The Gemara says not so fast. First of all, it only is in a case where there's a lot of pain. Number two, it has to be in a certain position on the finger. And as we showed you, Rashi and Tosfos are unclear about that. Now, I'm going to leave with a question that I'm going to have to leave. I'm going to leave the group going. So if you want to discuss that, the last question is, what does pain mean over here? Does it mean physical pain, or does it mean the mental anguish of the need to remove that piece of dangling nail or skin? That's a question that is not so much a Gemara question, but it's a good question for us to figure out. And again, I apologize. I need to bounce, but I'm going to leave the group running so that our scholars can help us possibly further develop this. I want to thank you all for joining us for this bite-sized Gemara session. Tomorrow morning, Be'ezer Hashem, will resume with a full hour Gemara session. Thank you all so very much for your indulgence, for being here, and for putting up with the short Sunday session. Yashikoyach, have a good day, a blessed day, a happy day. And again, thank you all so much. Again, I'm going to leave the meeting. Mark, I'm making you the admin, and let me know if there's any new chidushim. I hope you'll share with me.